And welcome back to The Lead. I'm Anderson Cooper, and today for Jake Tapper, the breaking news: at least 30 dead in Brussels after suspected ISIS suicide bombers hit both the major airport and the subway system this morning. Joining me now on the phone to talk about today's terror attacks, Republican presidential candidate, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Senator, thanks for being with us. In a statement earlier today, you said that it's more important than ever to secure the border, defeat ISIS. You also talked about stopping the flow of refugees from countries with a significant al-Qaeda or ISIS presence. But you also said, and I quote, "We need to empower law enforcement to patrol and secure Muslim neighborhoods before they become radicalized." What do you mean by that, by patrolling a Muslim neighborhood?
Well, Anderson, it's good to be with you. Thank you for having me. Today's terror attack in Brussels was heartbreaking, and all of us, our prayers go out to the families of those who were murdered, those who were wounded and injured, including especially the three Americans who were Mormon missionaries from Utah who were wounded in the attack. Our prayers go out to them and their families. And I think today underscores the need for a commander-in-chief who is focused on, as his principal objective, keeping America safe. And we have seen for 7 years the consequences of political correctness. This president refuses even to say the words radical Islamic terrorism, refuses to acknowledge the threat we face. We need a president that will squarely confront this threat, call it by its name, and do everything necessary to defeat radical Islamic terrorism and to utterly destroy ISIS.
So the question, though, is what do you mean by empowering law enforcement to patrol and secure Muslim neighborhoods before they become radicalized? As you probably know, the Anti-Defamation League has put out a statement saying demonizing all Muslims is a misguided, counterproductive response to the terrorist threat posed by those motivated by a radical interpretation of Islam. It's an irrational approach, harkens back to the fear and bigotry that led to the dark and tragic chapter in American history, the relocation of more than 100,000 Japanese to internment camps.
We have seen for 7 years that being afraid to confront what it is we're facing, being afraid to name it, that it is radical Islamic terrorism, has left us vulnerable to jihad, to acts of terror. We've seen that in Paris, we've seen that in San Bernardino, we've seen that in Brussels. Now, that does not mean targeting Muslims. It means targeting radical Islamic terrorism. You ask, what does that mean? You know, Mayor Bloomberg in New York had a very successful program to engage with the Muslim community and to prevent radicalization and to identify radical Islamic terrorists before they carry out acts of terrorism. Mayor de Blasio came in and ended that program, said we're no longer going to do so. That was foolishness. That was political correctness run amok. It's exactly the same approach that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton follow, of refusing to acknowledge who our enemies are. Now, our enemies are not every Muslim. Our enemy is radical Islamic terrorists, are the jihadists that seek to murder us. And it is the heart of law enforcement and national security to prevent those who are waging war on you from actually carrying out their attempted acts of war.
Beyond just having relationships with mosques, having law enforcement have ongoing relationship with mosques, which happens, frankly, in many cities with the FBI and local police departments in many cities currently in the United States, are you saying going beyond that? Because it does sound like in your statement, empowering law enforcement to patrol and secure Muslim neighborhoods. I still don't quite understand what that means.
It's very simple. It's doing what law enforcement does in any circumstance. If you have a neighborhood where there is a high level of gang activity, the way to prevent it is you increase the law enforcement presence there and you target the gang members to get them off the street.
But you're talking about Muslim neighborhoods, not radicals particularly.
I am talking about any area where there is a higher incidence of radical Islamic terrorism. If you look at Europe, Europe's failed immigration laws have allowed a massive influx of radical Islamic terrorists into Europe, and they are now in isolated neighborhoods where radicalism festers. It festers and grows, and sadly that leads directly to the kind of attack we saw in Brussels, to the attacks we've seen in Paris. We need to prevent radicalization, and that is by targeting it. And Anderson, I'll give you an example. You know, sometimes yesterday I was on with Wolf Blitzer on CNN, and Wolf asked me, well, gosh, you know, what difference does it make if you call it radical Islamic terrorism? Well, it impacts the policy dramatically, because if you won't identify it, and Obama won't identify it, Hillary won't identify it, Democrats won't identify it, then you don't act to combat it. And so, for example, President Obama is advocating and implementing a policy to bring tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees to America. That makes no sense. The FBI has told us they cannot vet these refugees. And ISIS has told us they intend to infiltrate those refugees to send in jihadists to murder Americans. It's why I've introduced legislation.
Can you name a neighborhood now that you would like to see these patrols in? A neighborhood that you believe has been radicalized? Because, again, it seems like what you're saying right now is different than what's in your statement. Your statement makes it sound as if...
No, it's not at all.
Okay, but so is there a neighborhood now that law enforcement currently is not doing what you suggest or would like to see?
Listen, a classic example was Mayor Michael Bloomberg's successful program cooperating with the Muslim community to target and prevent radical Islamic terrorism. And Mayor Bill de Blasio, afraid of being labeled politically incorrect, ended that program, said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And that is foolishness. It's the same foolishness that governs Barack Obama. After every one of these attacks, he goes on national and televised address and lectures Americans on Islamophobia. We need a president instead that targets the bad guys. And I'll give you another example of the consequences of political correctness.
One of the points, though, that many make in the United States, even law enforcement makes, is that it's critical not only that Muslim communities in the United States assimilate and feel part of the fabric of the United States, and to a great degree do already, much more so certainly than we're seeing in Belgium or other countries in Europe, but that they are on the front lines of this, and the information often has to come from them. And we have seen many cases where Muslim families or Muslim community leaders have come forward to identify potential trouble spots in their communities. Do you worry about alienating more people than you're actually discovering?
Anderson, of course, we should be working with the Muslim community to target radical Islamic terrorism, to prevent radicalization. That is entirely consistent with active and proactive law enforcement. You know, when you have a neighborhood that faces an increased incident of gang involvement, effective law enforcement works with the community, and it's the community that pays the price. It's the community who the law-abiding citizens are put at risk by that increased criminal activity. With radical Islamic terrorism, it's different from criminal activity. It is radicalization to war. They are waging jihad, and these are not isolated lone wolves, as the Obama administration insists. Rather, it is a coordinated war effort. And here's one example. So how
would you identify a community that needs these patrols, that needs securing? I mean, are you talking about in every mosque in America that there needs to be a police involvement? How would you decide?
Saying this is a clear example of why the international community has to work against ISIL.
Not terribly complicated. It is typical law enforcement practice and national security practice to focus on where there is an increased incidence of radical Islamic terrorism. And that.
But in the United States, I mean, is there an increased incidence of radical Islamic terrorism that is not already being addressed?
Of course. Look, New York City is a great example. Mayor Bill de Blasio shut down the program that was designed to prevent it. That is indefensible. It is political correctness run amok. And I'll give you another example, which is the San Bernardino terrorist. The female terrorist posted on social media a public call to jihad. But the Obama administration refused to look at social media because they thought it would be politically incorrect. We should not be admitting people who are calling for jihad. And we need a president who's focused on keeping this country safe. I would note as well on her visa application, she put a made-up address in Pakistan that doesn't exist. It was a fake address.
Senator.
And yet the vetting from this administration, because they don't acknowledge the threat from radical Islamic terrorism, they treat vetting her just the same as vetting anybody else. That doesn't make sense. You need
Cruz,
to focus on where the threat is.
We have to leave it there. It's at the top of the hour. We appreciate you calling in. Thank you very much. That's it for me on the lead. I'm in for Jake Tapper. I'll be back at 8 p.m. for AC 360. I turn you over to Will Blitzer now in the Situation Room.